Welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina. Today I'm going to be doing a discussion of Chapter 2 of Robert McKee's story. This chapter is titled The Structure Spectrum. He talks about story in terms of design, and I think that's an interesting way of looking at it because, if you have, let's say, a beautiful building with great frou-frou on the outside and poor design, it's going to and the same thing will happen to your book. You can have beautiful descriptions and gorgeous metaphors, but if you don't have a strong structure, your book's going to tank, just like a poorly designed piece of architecture. I think most of us are familiar with the concept of conflict, but I think if there's one thing that this book has put in my toolbox that has really been significant for me is the idea of value. That each scene should turn in value, meaning from like a negative to a positive place through the conflict or vice versa. So let's say you're starting your book and you are beginning on a real positive note. Your character, let's say, is a bride and she's getting ready for her big day and she's really happy and everyone's around her and everything's beautiful and everything's positive. And then there's a knock on the door and it's the best man telling her that the groom has not shown up, that he's not coming. So we go from a big positive to a big negative. So that could be what's also called the inciting incident, the thing that really changes everything. But already, just by setting that up, we're asking questions. What happened? What is she going to do? Oh my God, what's going on? So we're already in the story. So when you're writing your story, it's important to know these things when you're setting it up. I think that we've all read books where there are a lot of things going on, but nothing, and we always say, well, there was a lot of stuff happening, but nothing really happens. And I think that's because there are events, things are happening, but they're not significant. They're not conflicted events, they're not turning, and they're not moving towards like the first act. And the first act is, most novels are a 3-act structure, like a film. The first act, you have like a major turn. Okay? So you have the act and scenes, and there's a major turn. Then you have your second act, which is even building even more into your other major turn. And then that leads to your third act, which is your climax, which is an irreversible, absolute turn where nothing's going to be the same again. And McKee talks about that. I think what helped me personally is I didn't start out writing novels. I started out as a student of drama. That was my major in college, in comparative literature and drama. And then I went on to graduate school and got a degree in English. But studying dramatic structure has helped me tremendously. And I think when I sit down to write even a really short story, I'm thinking in terms of that. Where is that? What is that chart? And, there's a lot out there about what is the best approach to writing. You get the whole pantsers versus plotters debate, which I think is really interesting. I think most writers are a combination of both. Everyone has their own process. If this idea of writing outlines and charts before you even get started seems really, boring and a big turnoff, you don't have to start that way. Sometimes it's great to just start with a pre-writing exercise where you're developing a character through a scene that you might not even use in the book, but you're getting to know your character. It doesn't all just come out, it's a process. Okay, so here's this quote on story Climax, which I think is worth noting. A story is a series of acts that build to a last act climax or story climax that brings about absolute and irreversible change. Keep that in mind, that's important. He writes about plot. In some literary circles, plot has become a dirty word, tarred with a connotation of hack commercialism. The loss is ours, for plot is an accurate term that names the internally consistent, interrelated pattern of events that move through time and shape and design a story. So this idea that plot is something like like James Patterson is a great example. Now, I really had never read a James Patterson book until I took his masterclass online, and I just kind of fell in love with him as a personality, I have to admit. And it was fun to see him at BookCon along with Bill Clinton. James Patterson has gotten a lot of flack about being like such a plotter, but you know what? He's like a major bestseller. You want to think about your reader. You want to think about your reader's experience. McKee does acknowledge this idea of like the art film versus the blockbuster, but he also writes that in order to make a living, you're probably going to have to write the blockbuster versus the art film. But he has a lot of respect for both. They all fit into this story triangle he writes about. So it can be a little daunting, though. So the story triangle, I'll post a little picture of it. He calls it the classical design, and there are 3 types of plots. The arc plot, which is like your single protagonist, consistent reality, an active protagonist fighting against an external conflict. That would be like like your average action movie, but within that you find other varieties. So, and there is the mini plot, which is the like minimalism. A lot of like smaller independent films are like that, where it's more open to interpretation. The plot is happening more inside the viewer or the reader if it's a book. And I've read books like that. I've seen movies like that, of course. I love art films. I love, European films. So those films or stories would fall in that part of the triangle. And then there is the anti-plot, which is very abstract. It would be like David Lynch, and I'm a huge fan. Mulholland Drive would be more like a mini plot. It does have a plot, but then it kind of like the reality really shifts into a different plot, and it's more of like a hidden plot. But the plot is there. Where a film, another David Lynch film like Inland Empire, which I love too, is like an anti-plot. It doesn't really make a lot of sense in a traditional narrative way. It's more open to the interpretation of the viewer. And the same works with the book. But McKee makes the point that there's a lot of pretension. There's like artsy pretension. And I'm sure he has dealt with a lot in his seminars. He's dealt with a lot of people, writers who want to be really expressive and make like a personal statement, who don't know their craft. And you can tell he doesn't have a lot of respect for that kind of attitude. It's like, I read a lot of independent fiction. I'm very active on Wattpad, and I probably at least once a week read, if not the entire story, at least a good chunk of a story on Wattpad. And I really enjoy doing that, and I've read a lot of great stuff. And I also read, people send me books and independent books that I read, and sometimes I review. And I like that personal passion project. I like that personal vision. But a lot of times what prevents that book from being successful has nothing to do with whether they can write a nice sentence or anything like that. It's this. This is the problem for most stories. And even if you're working in like the mini plot or even the anti-plot, if you don't really know what you're doing with this, it's going to show in your book, and you're not going to engage your reader. Next time I will be looking at Chapter 3, Structure and Setting. So thanks for stopping in my haunted library, and I will see you soon. Bye.